Well, hey guys, welcome back to the After Hours podcast here at Midwest Whitetail. Episode 3 coming your way. And for everybody who took the time to listen to episode 2 last week with Gavin's story, we are happy to announce that that deer is alive. He has shown back up on camera for Gavin. And as you can probably tell behind me, we got a lot of rain. There's a huge change hitting the Midwest right now. And with the pre-rut coming, the timing couldn't be more perfect. That's what episode 3 is all about. We're going to dive into the tactics that the guys are going to be implementing over the next few days as this pre-rut continues to ramp up. We've got the weather change, so hopefully there's some tips in there that you can take something away from for your hunting. And best of luck if you're going to be hitting the woods. We appreciate you guys joining. Let's jump to the podcast now. All right, well, welcome to episode 3 of the After Hours podcast here with Midwest Whitetail. We are joined by some special guests this evening. We got Chad Holmes, who I believe is residing in Kansas, just made the long trip up there for his rutcation. Got Zach Rozmus, Kaleb Greiner, and then Evan Williams from formerly Hoyt bow hunting, but now is the head of Gopher Creations Management, whatever that is. So we're excited to hear your new ventures.
But you got to have fun with titles.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, man. Today, what we're trying to cover, everybody on here is going to be heading out to the woods. And if you're anywhere in the Midwest, you know that there is a major cold front barreling towards every state, and it is the perfect time of the year. As I mentioned, a lot of rutcations starting. So really what we're trying to accomplish with this one is dive into the minds of the guys, what bucks they're hunting, get some updates, and hopefully some tips and tricks that you can apply to your hunting this coming weekend. So where do we want to start, guys? Be cool before we dive into those tips. Everybody just kind of start with what deer you're after, how things have been, and we'll go from there. So somebody kick it off.
I want to hear how Caleb's been doing.
Oh, God. Things have been obviously a little shaky so far. In complete transparency, I'm running probably 40 cameras right now, you guys, and I normally have a lot of mature deer right now, but I've only got 2 deer that are consistent on a week-to-week basis, and it's this vendetta deer and that guards deer that we were chasing for Steve. That EHD just really wiped out the area, and seems like a 70% kill, which just is terrible for hunting. So it's been a little tough, but we still got a couple bucks that we're trying to get after, and with this cold front that's coming, I know of a couple does that are still alive in the areas that I'm hunting. So probably just going to try targeting wherever those does are. That seems to work for me in the past, at least for late October conditions.
Yeah. 40 cameras, I mean, to some folks might seem like an absurd amount, but one of the things I think is important to note is Kaleb often makes trips about 3 hours one way. So that MRI, especially for you, it's funny. It's like you hunt your home state, but you might as well be like Chad and Evan, the road warrior, so where that MRI comes into play is very important, to balance work or going hunting. So
here's a good stat. Sorry to cut you off, Josh. I've got all those cameras. I'm getting 12 photos of deer a day. 12.
Jeez.
Hey, Kaleb, most of this, these are these permission farms that are like these draws through these ag fields, kind of what you've focused on. Not a lot of cover. Same farms you've been on, or new farms, or?
Yeah, so it all started with that smaller area, the more flat terrain that I'm hunting, which is completely different for me. But I still ran cameras on a couple of those permission farms that you always got good deer on every year, so you got to run cameras on those. And after I found OG dead in that creek, I had to think, man, what other targets that are still missing that are normally here by now, where have they been? So out of curiosity, I went and started walking other farms, and every single farm that I walked had dead deer in the creek.
No kidding, man. That's I'm not that far from some of the places you hunt, but I haven't actually found any. I know Zach can probably allude to some of what you're hearing around the area.
Yeah. And obviously, what I do professionally, I get a lot of calls on stuff like that, with just individuals reaching out to me with like photos and a lot of times questions, type of thing too. Cause Kaleb and I have talked several times because a lot of the farms that we're hunting are pretty close proximity to each other too. And you're always wanting to know what the pulse is. Cause if Kaleb is finding it, is it the same on farms that I'm hunting, type of thing too. But even in some of the northern areas of, the counties that we're hunting in, I was hearing 100 numbers, type of thing that people were throwing around that they located on their farms, type of thing that a guy was saying essentially that they own roughly 1,200 acres and he got out and got boots on the ground and found 300 some deer, that were dead.
Wow.
Which
insane.
I haven't, that's crazy to hear those types of numbers, type of thing. But if you think back to, it's feeling a lot like 2012 did. If you remember, if you had friends that were really affected or families that were really affected, like it feels like that. I think the thing that's really different though is that Kaleb and I talked about this the other day, is that it's just so much later for us to be still working through EHD.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like pure speculation when him and I were talking the other day, but if we think back to like what August was this year in Iowa specifically and in the Midwest, like we had 2 weeks where we just had substantial rainfall, where that's not typical that we're dealing with that, where we had 2 weeks where we almost had like 15 inches of rain, in some areas where essentially if you had the drought conditions where we had dry creek beds that went suddenly to be at capacity, if not overflowing, for a short period of time to dry again, where that just gave those midges the opportunity to do another late hatch potentially, where, typically when we're thinking EHD, it's July, August, and early September that we're finding them, right? We're not really thinking hard horn, type scenarios where it's hunting season and we're locating deer that have literally just died days before, or, maybe even hours before where we're getting out there. It just seems odd to be going through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's pretty strange. I mean, I had one in the summer. The neighbor had a couple in the pond, and I thought it's a year for it. I mean, it was so dry, and you think about this: the pond's drying up, and the exposed banks of the mud and the midge, and all this, and then you think of bucks being at risk with all their velvet, easy vascularity for the midge to bite and spread the virus and all this kind of thing, and then. When Kaleb started finding it, I just had another buddy of mine say they were tracking a buck. They shot a buck, and he's texting me saying, "Are you guys seeing EHD?" He's like, "We're tracking a buck through one farm, and we found 7 dead deer." And it's a little 200-acre farm, and this is in northern Iowa. And I mean, I think it's pretty odd. I think that the interesting thing about the water coming and maybe allowing the hatch and then having it late. Obviously, the virus can be spread through other bite marks other than velvet, obviously. But
right,
I don't know. I have not found much on the river farm, but we're pretty sandy right there, so we don't have as much midge opportunity.
Well, and I think one of the differences, though, too, is that I think that one of the things is that during Iowa's gun season, that's when you're going to get more boots on the ground, and you'll probably get a pretty good read on how many actual dead deer are actually out there. And then Kaleb and I were talking that we spend a lot of time in the, in the spring doing shed season, type of thing too, where that's unfortunately when we're going to locate a really large number of these deer, type of thing where, I mean, pretty much if you locate them near a water source of some regard, you can pretty much chalk it up to EHD, at that point in time.
I was gonna say, before we get too far steering away from like how and why is this happening, I mean, certainly not my intellectual property. Last year Mark Drury on his property was worried about it and still worried about it this year. I was talking to him, and one of the things, because I had asked him about this situation last year, like why are you still worried about deer dying? I know last year was they survived the summer. He expected all of them to die after the winter because his worry was that they were infected. They survived it, and then they were going to run themselves down. And so, over by you guys specifically, what came to my mind was maybe they were all infected in that initial round, like you guys had alluded to. Maybe that infection occurred when we thought. But then if you remember right before, what was it, youth season, I think, we had that sustained week of like reintroduced 100-degree weather. And I wonder if that just wasn't kind of the final, axe to already compromised animals, because it really wouldn't make sense that biting fly would still be prevalent into September and October. And you talk about EHD and how quickly it can turn for the worse. I mean, what was it, 7 days, Kaleb? Deer was alive and then dead?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because I found deer that were dead 2 days prior that I knew were alive, and some that had obviously been dead for a month or so.
Yeah. So it just makes you wonder if like the initial infection occurred and certain deer weathered it better. And, you know, you can only throw so much at them and then something occurs. I'm not saying that's what it is, but that was a food for thought that he had proposed to me. And, you know, because the question is like, when were they infected? You know, whatever. But either way, not a great update.
And I would agree with that, you know, to an extent too, because I mean, they're coming into especially a part of the season too, where ideally they're going to be in peak, you know, stamina, peak, you know, weight when they're coming into the rut, especially if it's a buck, because they're going to be doing a lot of running, you know, during this time, you know, too, and building up food reserves to get through the winter, you know, that's always a part of it. So, because there's always going to be a percentage of the population that's going to, you know, either get infected and make it through it, or maybe they just don't show a lot of symptoms, no different than any type of virus, you know, like when it comes down to it, because that's a really hard thing to think about in the long term, like right now too. But, you know, one of the things that came out of like 2012 too, is that you saw some guys that killed some really, really big deer in the following years after that, because the pressure on the deer herd was a lot different. Because one of the things that we're talking about right now is that we're complaining about some of our deer numbers being down when we're also spoiled to have some of the best deer numbers in the Midwest when it comes down to numbers, were what we're accustomed to dealing with, you know, type of thing too. So, don't get me wrong, like it stinks to go through it in the short term, you know, type of thing too. And to be able to find them like that, I mean, that's difficult to be able, but Mother Nature always has a way of leveling the playing field a little bit when it comes down to it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
Kaleb, I hope you got one. You know, I hope one shows up and you're in a tree and they come run by you, man.
I won't be in a tree. I'll be hunting them Evan Williams style.
That's right.
Yeah, I love it. Even better. Is that a
Ground pounder?
Or how's that work?
Bowie knife. Bowie knife.
Yeah. So Kaleb, solid update. Now, one thing that I would pose to you guys before we get off of Kaleb's subject, do you think that this is going to help or hurt his season? You know, from the standpoint, he's not just finding dead bucks, he's finding a lot of dead does. Do you think that that's going to increase the daylight activity searching that he might be able to experience? You know, like we talked about, maybe his lockdown phase might be non-existent with the amount of does that he's found dead. Factual, not correct? Think they're going to go somewhere else?
I mean, my personal
possibility.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Evan.
And, you know, I know Iowa and Kansas are completely different as far as the amount of ag to open areas and hardwoods. So what I typically see is those bucks are having to move greater ranges to find does. So now that he's losing that doe population, you know, a lot of times, you know, guys talk about, you know, a buck moving a mile or having that core area of, you know, a 640 acres or something like that. You know, Josh, you and I were talking earlier today. I literally, a couple of years ago, my brother and I were hunting a buck, and we went like 6 or 7 days without getting him on our cameras. The last night that we hunted him on that property, driving home, we found him 6.5 miles away from that spot. So I think those bucks are going to move more. I think they're going to cover more distance. And the other thing is, are they going to stay around that property, or are they going to go away? And when they find those doe hotspots, are they going to make their way back? How far are they going to have to go to find those central core areas that does are now using? And is there enough does there to keep him? Or is it going to be more like a mature elk where he runs in and, you know, a satellite's got him rounded up and there's a core pocket of him? That mature buck comes through, checks him, breeds one or two, and then moves right on.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to follow along with, for sure.
I think interesting.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, to me, the concept of sort of the rut and whitetails and lockdown is about sex ratio. And so, you know, if you lost an equal number of does and bucks, then maybe it's these few bucks have these few does, and you don't necessarily see that. But if you've got your one mature one that you're looking for, and there's only a couple of does left, I think you see what Josh and Evan were talking about, where those does get bred and they got to go for a hike, and they're going to be covering some ground.
Yeah, it's going to be.
I'm going to take a little different approach on this, Josh. I'm going to take a little different approach on this, where I'm going to talk about Kaleb specifically, because one of the things I've always appreciated about him is he's going to cast a wide net. So one of the things I think that I have no doubt about it is that he's done a really good job of acquiring areas that he has permission to access in different areas too. Because one of the things with EHD too is a lot of those drought maps, you could follow that, and it's going to be pretty similar to what the EHD maps might be, type of thing for what the drought conditions were. And Kaleb's crafty, I know that he's going to put in the time, type of thing too. So ultimately it's just going to be wherever that intel's telling him to be, type of thing. There's going to be farms where maybe you have in your head that, hey, I'm going to be chasing OG on this farm. That's going to be the exclusive farm I'm going to hunt this year. But I feel like he does a really good job of wherever that target buck is, that's where he's going to be hunting and spending his time. So it just is maybe sending you back to the drawing board and telling you, hey, what you had in your mind, you thought was going to be your plan this year, it's out the window, type of thing. How do we go back to the drawing board and figure out what I need to make my next step to be?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty much the polar opposite of the Hog Junior chase.
Yep.
I mean, the polar opposite. So if you guys want to follow along with that daily blog, Kaleb Greiner, he's going to be in the woods, whether that's walking or hunting. I know we're going to continue to get updates from him, but keeping things moving. Mike, Zach, what you guys got for the next week?
Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to be I'm fortunate that I can be flexible with my schedule. I exaggerated what my deercation will be a little bit earlier today, some of the guys, but I'm gonna take some days here coming up. The weather's too good this weekend for you. If anyone has availability to take deercation, rutcation, whatever it might be, to me, I would be putting a lot of eggs in this weekend's basket, like when it comes down to it. Even if you can take one day on Friday or 2 days on Monday, Tuesday with this cold front, I think that overall, like the month of October, we've had relatively good weather, like if you look across the whole thing, we haven't had really concentrated, we had that first really good cold front early on in October, and then we had a subtle one after that, so maybe we didn't have as many really, really good ones like we typically have. But I think for as good as the conditions have been, I think the hunting's been pretty slow in my opinion for just general buck activity, because really when I'm thinking back, I've hunted pretty hard. And the really only mature buck encounter I've had was on the first night I hunted. It was 97 degrees, type of thing. So I think this weekend I'm going to really concentrate on areas where that transition to the food, because down at Area 52, we just picked the corn yesterday. So I think that that's going to be something I hit on, here the next couple days, is that they're going to be hitting that waste grain on the ground pretty hard, type of thing. And if I get the does out there, this time of the year, the bucks are going to be out there trying to get that pecking order established coming in the end of October. And I feel like end of October is the best hunting in the entire season. I love it. You can be aggressive with your calling, do things a little bit differently. And before they disperse in the month of November, where who knows where they're going to be, once things get crazy. So,
yeah. Now, building off your comment about the month of October, I feel like maybe the way I look at it is it was very consistent, okay weather.
Right.
And if you think back to last year, it was pretty hot, and then boom, big cold front. And there's just so much change and variation in the weather.
Yeah,
and I mean, even
that's exactly right.
You talk about, or we're going to get to it, I should say. I already talked to Mike about this, but, tonight may not have been the best nights or the best of the upcoming days, but Mike's going to dive into an incredible hunt that you just had. And it was just enough change. And, right now, what is it? We're talking the 25th. By tomorrow, by Friday, we go from southerly winds, low pressure, all the way to swinging to north winds and potential for snow this weekend. And so that, I guess to your point, Zach, we have a very large change. It's not just the good weather front. I mean, it's been stagnant south. We're doing all the polar opposites, lining up with pre-rut behavior. I know I've seen you, Mike, Kaleb, everybody on this call, especially in the Midwest where deer are callable, that aggression is going to take a huge peak, and the does are still not a non-factor to an extent. I mean, obviously you get the first hot does, but the boys are going to be feeling it, but there's not going to be anything to go after yet except a bow and arrow, hopefully.
I just feel like we're always talking about how like the season's like a slow climb, like a roller coaster, but it just felt like this October has just been like, you're just right at that bottom and it just never made that climb, type of thing, where like now it just feels like all of a sudden you're just going to be without the climb. You're just going to hit the drop off, where it's just going to get crazy, like really, really quickly. Whereas I don't know, that's just been my experience, this October, where it just seems like you haven't had as many of those hunts where it's like, hey, there's a good 3 or 4 year old out here that's getting frisky early, type of thing, getting ramped up for his first rut, type of thing. It just doesn't seem like we've had as much of that. And that's just been my experience so far. But I just really think that this weekend's going to be the real big change that we've all been looking for.
It's got the recipe,
what
that's
a better
for sure.
way, Mike.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about this October is, I mean, I don't know. I think I made 10, 12 hunts or something like that. And almost every hunt was a northwest wind. And so one of the things that gets the deer moving is these changes, whether they're changing to warm or to cold, like you need the changes. And we got that cold front, and it's like, we had a lot of north winds and we had highs in the 60s, and like, it wasn't like a super hot October, but it just sort of came and then just stayed. And so then it just, it wasn't super exciting. And then we have a little bit of variations in it, and but now we're timing up a huge weather change with the shortening days and the end of October and the rut looming. And I just started my time off, so I took today off, tomorrow off. I have Friday afternoon off, then Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and so I've got a little 6-day stretch. I always love to focus on the end of October. I love that sort of pre-rut, early rut callability. These mature bucks, the first does coming in, they're the homebody bucks that are like, they're really looking hard. And it's interesting. I've hunted 2 mornings this week. A few days ago, I hunted a morning, had a great hunt, saw 3 4-year-olds in the pinch on the river farm. So it's a good spot, but that first hour was super intense. I mean, does, bucks, grunting, nudging, not just the little young ones. And I thought, oh, good. It's nice to see signs of this. And that day was nice because we had like a little pressure change. We went north wind to south wind, and the very next morning goes back to north. And so there was a little bit of variation there that seemed to get them excited. Right now we're in the low pressure, a high of 70. It's hot. It's humid. It doesn't feel good at all. And you look at the data and you say, well, today's going to be terrible, but we still have that end of October shortening days. And, Ryan and I were heading out to the farm this morning. I'm like, look, I took the day off. We're going to sit in the tree, right? You're going to go hunt. And so, I got to commit to my days off. And I'm like, whether it's range, lightning, thunder, whatever, Ryan knows we're going. And I'm driving over to the farm this morning in the dark, and all of a sudden, mature buck chases a group of does across the road in front of me. We're probably 6-7 miles from the farm, but it's cut corn, a lot of deer out in the fields, and it was a really nice buck just running does around. I go like 3 miles down the road, another one, and I'm like, man, that's interesting. It's 62 degrees as a low, and it's drizzling and it's hot, and so we got in the stand this morning, and I went. I creeped up the slough a little bit into the edge of the bedding in what we call the head of the slough. Had a lot of great sits there over the years, and I thought, October 25th, we're going to go in there. And I mean, we had an hour and a half of nonstop activity. Right as soon as it started getting daylight, we had this buck I call Moss, which I have him at 4. It's possible he could be a 5-year-old, but we ended up having 6 bucks come in. There were 4 does running around, grunting, chasing, bucks sparring, Moss running every young buck off. I was like, is this November? What's going on? I mean, I said to Ryan multiple times, like, this does not make sense. I mean, it's 62 degrees, it's hot and muggy, and this buck's just like, where's the first one? Where is the first doe? Yeah. And you could tell that they were excited about that. What are you going to say, Josh?
I was going to say, Before we move forward, you mentioned you made a couple morning hunts. I think it would be interesting for maybe somebody who doesn't know what the pinch is or the head of the slough. What makes those good morning sets? Why do you feel comfortable going in October? Just
Yeah,
like I said, it's a
sure.
pretty unique spot. So
It is. It makes it sound like I'm diving into some big sanctuary, but actually, both of these sets, they're right on the edge of the major bedding area in river bottom ground, and the pinch is unique in that it literally is a pinch. So between the slough and the river, and it's an open oak flat, but that leads into the bedding area, and all these deer that work their way off to the north to the ag fields at night, I can go in there, and I can go in there. There's no deer in there, right? They're all still out in the ag. So I get in there in the dark. It's easy to get in. I don't have to disturb very much. I'm literally 100 yards off the edge of like my mowed lanes, and then the sun starts coming up, and here they come. And it's like the first hour and a half is just steady. You'll have 20 to 30 deer walk by you, and you're just mixing, of course, bucks and does right in this area where there's food, there's acorns. It's a pinch area, really, really good. I don't hunt the pinch in the morning on the south because the deer come from the north. And so I move 300 yards over. I have access through a slough. I blow my wind back up the slough. And so at least I'm just canceling kind of one area with ground scent and with my wind. And I can see this is at the neck of the peninsula. And so I've got 100-acre peninsula that's all bedding. And when I'm sitting in this stand, if I look to the north, I can see the river. And I look to the south, I can see the river. And actually, that wind and rain last night knocked a lot of foliage off the trees. So the visibility this time of year is normally pretty tough, but the wind last night, we could see really well. And, it's just constant movement actually all morning because they come in there, they bed, and then they'll get up and they'll forage around. There's some oak trees in there, and they'll kind of walk around, and the bucks are looking around, kind of nudging. I mean, it's not full rut stuff, but it was enough activity that it got me excited for what's this weekend going to be like, because we have poor conditions now, October 25th, and you're seeing them feeling it. And then we have this huge temperature change coming high in the 40s to line up with the end of October. It's super exciting. I mean, I think a lot of bucks are going to die. It's just really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I think a big takeaway there for me just listening is, okay, you're along the edge of a bedding area. You can get in there clean. But the most important part of that, especially not doing an all day sit, is that it's kind of the perfect setup where they are still going somewhere else that allows you to get out. Because I remember when I was, younger, that was my biggest mistake is I'd always want to get into a good morning spot and then I'd have to get out and then I'm blowing out everything on the exit. And so, I just try to think like, how could somebody who's listening to this take, your setup and apply it to their property? And, I think there was some really good information in there. So,
entry exit is obviously super important. We talk about it a lot. And actually we were in the tree this morning and Rye was looking around saying, what about that tree or that tree? I said, the reason I'm in this tree is because it's at the edge of the slough. And this property is a wetland. So there's no topography. The thing is flat and like it's all grass. And so, you have some visual barrier horizontally to the deer, but I mean, it's risky walking around the thing in the daylight. You can get seen. And so just dropping down, it's 4 to 6 feet down. We can get in and out of there and nothing can see, even if they're bedded. In fact, I've walked by a lot of bedded deer before. And so that little bit of topography helps me a lot, but entry and exit, I mean, it's the reason I'm in that tree is so that I can get out, like you mentioned, at the end of the hunt and not be blowing it up. I can come back and hunt the afternoon, a couple 100 yards away and catch them coming back out, and it works great.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, certainly excited to follow along with Zach and Mike. Like I mentioned on Kaleb, there's a daily blog going to be some really exciting stuff. And I'm excited to see tonight's hunt that you haven't talked about that yet. Was it the afternoon? I guess maybe it was the morning you were talking about.
Actually, both hunts. So this afternoon, I was like, let's just go. It's hot. It's 72 degrees. It's I don't want to burn up all of the spots I'm hunting DK. And so we moved over deeper into the farm at an area that butts up against another big bedding area. There's oak trees. There's a little green food plot. And I can see a lot of country. And I had some work to do midday today and some things that I couldn't get in there super early. That was another reason we weren't going to go into one of the main spots. But so, 20 deer this morning, chase and run around, great morning hunt. And then this afternoon, we sneak in a different slough up the edge, get in this oak tree. And from the second, Rise climbed the ladder. I said, doe coming. He stops on the ladder. She walks by. He gets in the tree. And we just quietly set up. And before we're set up, we've had 8 does and fawns come under us. And it was constant all night long, does and fawns eating acorns, looking around. Not a lot of buck activity right under us, but you felt like, there's so many does right here. Any minute, one of these bucks is going to come and just bust it all up. But I could look 200 yards over and see a cut cornfield. And we had 12 or 14 deer in there. And we had a big mature 8-pointer come out in there and just harassing the does. And I'm like, man, again, these conditions, seeing that kind of activity, it gets me pretty excited for what's coming.
That's awesome.
It was a great day.
Yeah. Again, Midwest Whitetail Daily Channel, we can't stress that enough. If you're wanting the most up-to-date offering of what we can bring, that's where it's going to be. And I know there's going to be some exciting hunts coming up over this next week. But Chad, you are quite a few miles to the west of us here in Iowa. Everything's happening pretty much a day earlier for you. If I'm not mistaken, you're kind of on that day of change right now. Rain going through and got some big bucks. You're out on the same property that Bella was able to shoot her first out-of-state deer earlier in the season. What drove you to make the overnight crazy trip all the way from Mississippi to Kansas?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what Mike was saying. We started seeing on the cuttybacks, the bucks were coming in. You'd have a group of does in there feeding, and they'd be pushing them and bumping them. So you kind of knew they were feeling a little frisky. So knowing that front was pushing in, we thought it'd just be a good opportunity to get in here and take a chance on, trying to go ahead and get a tag field. We have a new buck showed up there. He's basically a 5x6, and he's got a little unicorn point that showed up, and he's staying in there, same general area that Bucky's is in. And so just a lot more activity than what we had been seeing as far as, consistency go. Previously they'd be coming in, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and they're gone. Well, now we're seeing them 8 o'clock at night, 3 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. And so they're constantly making their rounds back through there 2 or 3 times. So I kind of got a hunch that we probably ought to try to slip on in here and get set up. And we set up tonight, pretty close to where Bella killed her deer. And, we did see a nice 3-year-old, and he was pushing some does around. And so I think, just to echo what the other guys have said, I think you get into Friday and Saturday and possibly Sunday, they're calling for a chance of snow here as well. I think we're going to have a good chance of, having some pretty good encounters.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm very excited to hear the updates as they come in. But Evan, first off, you changed jobs on us. So you're just, you're a trick of the trade, man. That's great. Now we're very excited to have Evan.
I got to keep people on their toes.
Yeah, no. We're very excited to have Evan with us on the podcast. He does a million things over there at Hoyt Archery, and we wanted to have him on because he is also about to start his vacation, going out to Kansas, if I'm not mistaken, potentially going to link up with Chad, but going to bring a different perspective. You come from all the way in Utah, grew up in the Plains region, so you kind of heard what these guys are going to be focusing on. If you are going to Kansas, totally different terrain. How are you going to be tackling this next week?
Well, the hard part is I know I got a red moon coming up, and with this cold front coming in, I've got no cameras out. I'm still making phone calls, trying to get permission. So I'm going in as blind can be. The benefit that I've got right now is my camp is usually myself, my brother, my sister-in-law, my niece, and then 2 of my buddies from Colorado. I'm the only one who's got tagged. So I've got
that's a lot of eyes. A lot of eyes.
Yeah, the benefit too is because of that, I've got access to all this ground that I typically haven't hunted before. A lot of the areas I'm going to be hunting, I personally haven't accessed in almost 10 years because there's been so many of us. I've physically stayed away from a lot of these properties and put my focus on either mule deer or hunting public land, trying to give everybody else better opportunities. I get to do a little bit more hunting than them. So, if I can fill a Western tag here or there, I got meat in the freezer. And so, I'll go play around for a week on public ground and, roll the dice the way it is. So with Kansas changing a lot of their laws this year, no game cameras and no baiting on public land. Haven't been able to bait before, but no trail cameras at all on public is one of the new regs. So kind of levels the playing field. I've got 2 or 3 good public pieces. But I've got another guy that I know that's coming down. We just linked up on social media a little bit ago. So I'm helping him out, trying to kind of gain him some perspective on what those properties are going to look like. But we should be rolling in just ahead of this cold front. So my plan is when we get in Saturday afternoon, I've got about 20 cameras I got to go get out in a real short period of time. And then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday will be a lot of observation sits. I need to figure out what properties are holding deer. It's been super dry, just like everywhere else. But I don't even know what kind of ag I've had on properties. One of my spots last year was corn. I'm assuming in the rotation, he's probably got beans in there. So if those are out, it's not going to be a good food source, in my opinion, for what I've seen in there in the past. I don't know that a lot of the neighbors around there were going to have corn in. So some of the new stuff I've got, one of them is about a mile from my folks' place. It's got a really good looking inside corner right in the middle of the pinch. So I believe that should have had corn on it this year. So probably put a cutty back out in that area and just kind of see what's going on in there. But the first 4 or 5 days, I don't know how I'm going to approach it because I've got more access than I've had before. And my ground is anywhere from an hour and a half west of my folks to an hour east. So I've got a lot of room, kind of like Kaleb, where I got a lot of ground to cover. Yeah. But we'll kind of focus on the first 5 days with this cold front around home. And then the plan is to get down to Chad. And then I'm going to show him how to decoy deer and get on the ground and go have some fun.
Yeah.
So,
I want to see that.
But
that'll be awesome. Yeah, I've seen some of those hunts you guys put out, you and Danny. It looks intense, to say the least.
I'll tell you what, you get, again, it's a lot like elk or turkey hunting. You get the right animal in the right mood and the right state of mind. You better be committing that you're going to shoot him. Otherwise, you need to drop that decoy and hit the dirt and let him walk off, or you're going to be shooting an animal in self-defense.
No, it's pretty sweet to hear all the different variations. I don't have much of an update. I'm actually going to be able to go spend the week with my buddy Brian in a tree. He's coming all the way up from Georgia, drew a tag, and we're going to be traversing Iowa public land. So if I was out, I would be doing pretty much what all of you guys are, which is just taking advantage of it. I mean, if there was one lesson to take away, just don't wait. Don't wait for a picture. That'd be the biggest thing in my opinion. Is like, a lot of my buddies have been like, yeah, I'm still going to wait for November. If I get some photos, I'll go. I'm like, dude, don't wait for it. If it's going to happen, you need to be there. I think you could probably at this point make a pretty good guess of where you'd want to be for the time of year. And so I think that leads to kind of the next portion of this is, and whoever feels most comfortable answering it. But if you're a guy, you decide to take Zach's advice, you're going to go hunt, give me your best morning factors and give me your best evening factors. Where are you going to be sitting?
I'll piggyback off of what you were just saying. I mean, like, one thing I would say is, this 3-day period here, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or whatever it's going to be, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, if you had no cameras and nowhere to hunt and you just went in the store and bought a bow, I'd be like, go get in a tree right now and sit as many hours as you can, because this should be some crazy, awesome hunting.
Mm-hmm.
My approach in the morning, of course, is this time of year, I try to get on the edge of the bedding, like I mentioned earlier. You know, those does are coming back. There's not a lot of them in heat, but the bucks are anxious and they're checking them. And so I want to be able to, you know, get in a spot where I can call ideally. So something that sets up well for calling, just because a lot of these bucks will respond well to calling. And I like to do blind calling. So I want to have as much of a bulletproof setup as I can for keeping bucks from getting downwind to me. And then I still focus for the most part in the afternoon on food sources. I mean, we got this full moon coming. Afternoon should be good. It's that moon's on the rise. It's out early before dark. And these deer are still on a feeding pattern. And so, you know, we talk about hunting the does, and green food sources are still pretty strong. Obviously, you got to figure out whatever your best food source is, whether that's cut corn, cut beans, standing grain, or green. I mean, tonight I could see multiple things. There were deer in all of them, but I try to get where the does are, and I expect these, especially these homebody mature bucks, to be there looking for that first available doe.
Yeah, one thing on the morning, I mean, even staying just a little bit later than maybe you have been. You know, that midday activity, like you kind of mentioned, looking for that first available doe, that might be one thing to consider. When you say that you saw deer in all of those different variations, you know, you mentioned acorns, green, and corn. Did you notice a earlier food source? You know, that's one thing I hear with green plots a lot, is that'd be your first activity.
Yeah, and I think it depends on where you're at relative to bedding too. Like, I mean, I have a green food source and acorns on their walk out from the bedding, and so they get to that before they get to the ag. But I mean, we were laughing at how these deer, they would come out through the acorns, they'd sit there, and you could hear them hoover, vacuuming, sniffing the ground, looking for the, you know, the acorns. And at one point we had 6 does under us, and you just heard, you know, I was like, man, listen to them go. You know, then they walk over to the little winter wheat, and they ate for a little bit, and they turned around and they came back. And Rye's like, I don't know how I'm going to make this blog. It's going to be like, every time they walk to the left, I'm going to do a ding. Every time they walk to the right, I'm going to do a ding. And they just kept walking under, back and forth. You know, acorns green, acorns green, acorns green for 3 hours. And as the sun went down, they started moving out to those ag fields where they're more exposed. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that green stuff's going to dry up here, you know, and the acorns are going to dissipate as well. And so then you're going to, I think, see more of that transition to the cereal green.
Yeah, because one of the things I was going to say with green sources too, because alfalfa is something that's played a big part in my season, because I incorporated it down a lot down in Area 52. But I think as of right now on Sunday night, they're forecasting almost 22 degrees, which is potentially going to be our first hard frost of the season, you know, here in the Midwest. Like we've had a few light frosts, but nothing that's been hard, you know, to this point in time where, you know, alfalfa, you know, it's a great protein, you know, it's king, you know, like one of the at the top of the protein contents. But after those first hard frosts, like it'll start to dissipate, you know, pretty quickly, you know, where that's one of the things where clover, a lot of times it'll stick around a little bit longer too. So just anything that's in front of you, you know, like Mike said, if you have a cut cornfield, or, you know, just take advantage of what's on the properties that you're hunting, you know, type of thing for food sources right now. Because I even think that, you know, getting back to the original question too, that, you know, most of the time in the mornings, you're going to be hunting either right on the edge of bedding or transition back to bedding is where you want to be a lot of times this time of the year. I would say in the afternoons, if you're hunting on the edge of bedding, you know, type of thing, a transition area, that's fine. But if those guys that want to dive in the afternoons into a bedding area and think that this time of the year they're going to have a really good hunt, a lot of times it's going to set up for a really slow hunt, in my opinion, if you just really dive in there in the afternoons. But find those field edges and find those, you know, food sources in the afternoon for sure. Yeah,
no, I think the thing about when you mentioned right there, diving in the afternoons into a bedding, is it's almost like a zero hero. You know, if you blow out the bedding on the way in, and even if you get in clean, as soon as they exit to go to that food, don't be expecting something else to happen as the night progresses. So you guys both mentioned in the evenings and even in the mornings, you know, Mike, I know, loves to call. Zach, I know you've had a lot of success calling. And Kaleb, I've got to spend a lot of hunts where that guy can play a dang musician band with every call if we're sitting in the woods. So if you had one call with you at this time of the year, what are you taking? Is there a progression that you would particularly use? Right now, the grunt tube would be my main thing. I don't know if I'm going to get super aggressive into the rattling antler type. Maybe you could, but the grunt tube would be the one that I wouldn't leave home without. Just the ability to make initial contact, have that snort wheeze available to me. What are you looking for calling right now?
For this Western guy, yeah, it's grunt tube with a snort wheeze.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be super aggressive. It's going to be, I consider it a tending grunt, just that, that buck's got his nose down and he's scent checking. So, and it's, again, I haven't had I always pick the wrong time of the year to go. So luckily I got 2 full weeks to do it this year, but especially being with this cold front coming in, that's going to be my go-to.
Yeah. I have not been carrying my rattling antlers to the tree, but this morning I was like, you know what? I need to get them. And I've had a lot of success rattling in bucks the end of October. There's a lot of different situations here. It's very different blind calling versus calling to a deer. If I see a buck, walking around, I always start light grunts, the softest volume that'll get his attention. And, you're reading body language. You got an aggressive deer. You either can see it or you know it from history. A little snort wheeze, man, it has worked for me so many times to get a buck to just turn and come right to me. I rarely rattle at a buck. I just, if I see a buck that I want, I'm usually talking to him just with the grunt tube and the snort wheeze as opposed to just start banging antlers. But if I see him moving off, whatever, I might try it. Blind calling, particularly later in the morning. So if I blind call early in the morning, it's a couple grunts, and not a whole lot more. Just like, hey, there's deer in the area. See if a buck's kind of cruising by a couple 100 yards off or 100 yards off and here's a grunt that I can't see because of foliage, maybe he'll come check me out. Later in the morning, I try to paint a picture of maybe a buck fight or something like that. So I'll start off with some grunting, then maybe if nothing happens, I'll do grunt with a snort wheeze, and then all of a sudden I might go ahead and bang them together. And I've had success with that where I'm on the edge of the bedding and there might be a buck bedded in there. It's 10 a.m. and he'll get up and be like, what's going on over there? And come charging in. Mm-hmm. That's my general approach to calling at all times of year. But man, I love this last week of October for it. It just seems to work so well.
Yeah. And I would say for the rattling antlers from here on out, it's good to just have them with you, from here on out, like whether or not you use them or not, when you're going to the tree at this point in time or blind or whatever you're doing, having them in wherever you're at and set up, having them with you, because I think more like right now as like, that's the last club that I'm grabbing out of the bag. If it's a situation where, hey, he's moving off, maybe he's into cover, type of thing, can't see me, I want to draw his attention. But the big thing is that we didn't really talk about is also, I know it's going to have some 20 mile an hour winds this weekend too. Like that can affect, the audible level, as far as you may want to use that grunt tube, type of thing. And he's 200 yards away and he just physically cannot hear it, type of thing too, where having that rattling antlers, sitting there in the bag ready to go for you, that could be the ticket on whether or not you go home with that buck that night, type of thing, just getting his attention.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's a great point.
Great point. Yeah.
Shameless plug, that's one thing that I've been extremely pleased with the new Woodhaven Midwest Grunter. I don't know if you guys have tried to blow it out, but it's very, very hard to do, to the point where, all grunt tubes are not made equal from that standpoint. And if there's one thing that seems to be the comparative line, it's how loud you can get with them. Mm-hmm. So
I have had I've had the grunt calls that turn into a duck call, type of thing too. Like if you get really hard into them, type of thing, that it turns into a really good mallard call, if you get into them pretty good. So
yeah.
Those are the ones I give my buddies to try.
Exactly. I think that, for me watching, as an editor, one thing that might not get thought about enough when it comes to calling is how often these deer actually do hear you. You know, that especially when like the situation you painted, Mike, where you can see this deer, you're calling to them. You know, I can think of so many times where hunter calls, they're like, man, didn't hear it, but the ears perk back. You know, they very clearly heard you. So that is just one thing. Like, I think there's a really solid approach there with starting as quiet as possible and then making your way up. Because, you know, if you start to give them too much and, you know, you might not visibly see the body language, it's like a full turnaround. I think oftentimes if they hear you, they'll eventually come check you out. And that's, you know, through editing hunts over the years, I feel like most of what I think I know, I've got to just watch. You know, it's like doing a seminar every single time. So just something else to keep in mind when calling.
It's a great point. It's a great point. I mean, a lot of times if we have a cameraman, we're like, hey, you got eyes on him? You know, I'm going to call behind me. I'm not looking. I often, you know, I got my binos on the deer and I've got the grunt tube in my mouth and I'm looking for that ear to turn or something that's very subtle, because a lot of those bucks, they're sitting there doing whatever and they hear it. It might take them a while to actually say, okay, let me go check it out. And they turn and they walk, and you keep tooting your horn, you know, you can hurt yourself more than you help you. So the second I get any sort of inkling of a reaction, you just stop and just watch them for a minute, see what they're doing. It's a great point to make. I think it can save you.
That tail flicker is a good indicator as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. No.
So along with that,
go ahead.
Sorry, Zach, go ahead. I was just say along with that, like, you know, Mike, when you're hunting that marshy area where it's flat, are you running a decoy? Do you have a 3D body out there? That way they've got something visual to check, because you may not have a lot of terrain to, you know, roll to pitch. You know, you're not sitting on the edge of a bank that you can pitch down to another level.
Right. Yeah. And I do sometimes. I don't do it a ton. I do have a lot of just visual barrier, you know, and so I'm very mindful of calling if a deer is close enough to see where I'm at. You know, and that's going to be really soft mouth snort wheeze or something, like just real soft. But, you know, if I'm up in a tree, I can see tons because it's this grassy marshland, but you get down on the ground and they do have a lot of trouble seeing, you know, so it's different than, say, some short sagebrush or some like canary. I mean, we got a lot of stuff where there's visual barriers. So I don't always run a decoy. I've had success with them. I hate scaring does, you know, and, you know, it's like, I just hate when a doe comes in and starts fighting at the decoy. I'm like, you know, so I get more excited to use them later in November. And I feel like I have enough visual barrier to the deer that I pick and choose when I call to make sure they're not looking over, hey, there's no deer there, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah. I remember, what would it have been, Mike? 2018 is when your guys' farm at that point had flooded. Yeah. And everything was matted down. You know, that was, there was a big change in the amount of buck. I mean, the deer activity for sure, because the cover was gone, but just the general buck activity, you know, it's like it's a jungle, you know, when you walk in, you really can't see in a lot of places 15 yards. And, you know, as you watch your guys' encounters, it's one thing to keep in mind. Is like, I think that's why calling is so effective for you, is because, like, if they hear it, they have to make some sort of commitment to get to you. Yeah. And then there's so many deadfalls and things in their way. You know, you hear Owen talk about all the time that, you know, deer are creatures, not laziness, but they're conservative. And so where your stands seem to be in the perfect spots to catch them in those paths of least resistance, you know, with all the different variables factored in. So that's a great point you made there, Evan, because, like, I think a lot of people, when they make comments like, well, this doesn't work where I'm at, well, maybe it doesn't work because there's different variables at play there, you know, and you have to go try to find that part in your farm, the property that you're hunting, that maybe you can execute, you know, visual barriers, topography, terrain change, etc.
Yeah. Well, and Mike made a good point too. Like, depending on what your doe population is, it may not be a good place to use a decoy in general. Does in general do not respond well to a decoy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, they see it, either there's no movement or that buck's not turning to come over and check me out. You shouldn't be there because this is the direction I'm going, and we're always the first ones in the field or the first ones on this course of movement. Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
matters.
there's a lot of factors that go in with the decoy, like, again, I got to learn a lot of it. What you say?
How far you got to carry it? That's one.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's a variable. Exactly.
Yep.
I already have to carry Ryan. I mean, Jesus, how am I supposed to carry
Evan, so, talking about decoys, if you were going to use them, I'd be curious to know what your most important variables to consider are. Like, for example, decoy placement. I think whether you're using a buck or whether you're using a doe, how you position them can make or break your hunt. One of the things that I got to visualize and see last year is you always want to have your buck pointed quartering towards you on the upwind side of you so that the downwind location of the buck, because if you have a buck decoy and a buck's going to go, they're always going to come in on the downwind side.
They're going to circle.
Down.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
so, factoring that in with your stand locations, not putting them at 20 yards where if the deer is going to come, he's going to come downwind of you. You want him to go downwind of that decoy. I killed my first deer over a decoy last year. It was the most fun hunt I've ever had. It's just watching that behavioral change. And granted, again, in the Midwest, after going to Georgia and hunting, it's a very different animal, right? Like, I don't know if I'm going to have that same experience in the South, but here in the Midwest, it's a very viable option. But you probably can make mistakes with it too.
Oh, and I've made every single one in the book and probably rewritten some of them. But, some of the best encounters I've had too have been over a decoy. 2 years ago, we were sitting on a drilled wheat field, and we were in a blind on the edge of a known bedding area, and 300 yards to the north, we had one buck that we were glassing all morning, and he pushed 5 different bucks off of that field. And so we went back in that evening, took a decoy with us, hoping he would still be in that area. And sure enough, we put the decoy at 13 yards. I was like, I don't want to get it too far out there, and let's just play around with it. Let's see how close we can get something if he reacts to it. He came out of the timber at 45 yards, and he circled 60 yards upwind of that decoy to come all the way around, and he was 5 yards from the blind in between us and that decoy. Could care less that we were there. He was fixed on that sucker.
Yeah.
That's how you hope it always works.
Yeah. And then you hope your buddy makes the shot. But
yeah,
that buck
sounds like
that buck lived.
Sounds like a good opportunity for Hoyt's recurve.
Well, we could have poked him with the stabilizer.
Yeah.
Josh, you alluded a little bit to decoy placement. And I've always learned and been taught and put into practice. Bucks tend to approach bucks from the front, and doe decoys from the back, and so when you're thinking about how a buck is going to approach, which way your wind's coming from, where you want to give room between you and the blind, that depends on, how you angle, how you place. I think that was all very good things to sort of mention for people that are maybe thinking about using it for the first time.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like if you think about like the doe decoy, they're going to come from behind. But what we noticed last year was there's a lot smaller gap of like, they're not going to come circling downwind and then go. They're just going to come from behind. So I might place my doe decoy in bow range, whereas my buck decoy, I might place it 40 yards, 35 yards, hoping for the 30, 25-yard shot. There's something that we observed. And obviously what kind of field you're putting them in, or whether it's the timber, there's a lot of different variables, but either way, a lot of things covered tonight that in this pre-rut time frame, hopefully would be valuable information if you're looking to go and hunt. One thing that Mike and I keep talking about and really appreciate if you guys would take the time to is drop any questions below in this podcast comment section of what you guys want us to comment or talk about. We'll definitely make a social post as we get going here just to try and get some more eyeballs on that question seeking. But either way, very excited to see how this next few days unfold. I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum here, but could not have better weather for a time of year where it's already going to be good despite the weather. We do have those first available does, but I would take this time over November 7th all day, because really you've got the Bucks attitude where you want it. Make the time to go and hunt, and best of luck if you get the chance to. So to end things, Evan, maybe you don't have anything to say. Maybe you do. It's
I always have stuff to
2023.
say. You can ask anybody who knows me.
Well, 2023.
I can talk.
We're
Yeah,
approaching the
same
month
here.
of November. Does
Yes,
Hoyt
we
have
are.
any Christmas presents for the viewers out there?
Absolutely. We always have Christmas presents. Yeah, be
What
looking,
can you
guys.
tease me? What can you tell me?
We've got honestly, it's the most exciting lineup. Not only that I've gotten to be a part of in my 8 years at Hoyt, but honestly in my 17 years in the industry now. We made some big leaps and bounds in 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframes, with changes to the line, some things that we were bringing into the industry. In my opinion, this far surpasses anything that we've done in the past. Got a lot of new changes coming, a lot of new cool technologies, and just things that you would look at and go, okay, that's a little tweak, and then you start playing and learning the setup and figuring out what that quote unquote little change did, and it yielded very, very big outcomes for us.
That's awesome. Yeah,
It
I
is
know
awesome.
the whole team is excited to get the bow in hand. I've gotten the chance to shoot a few arrows through one of the new bows, and you hit it on the head. I mean, it's almost to the point where you're like, this is too good. Something's weird here. But I won't give away too many details. Out of the box, have been shooting very well with it, and I'm very excited to get the rest of the team's feedback here. And more importantly, if you are in the market for a new bow, go visit your local retailer once those bows drop. Any sort of general time frame of when folks can expect to see those showing up on the shelves?
Very soon.
Good enough.
It's almost November.
There you
So
go.
yep, November is the time. We obviously have a set marketing plan and teasers and everything ready to go. So just stay up to date with Hoyt social media, and we got some teasers coming.
Perfect. Well, we love to hear it.
Awesome.
And thank you so much for taking the time tonight, man. We appreciate that
pleasure,
very
guys.
much. And all you guys, hope you enjoyed this podcast. Hope you enjoyed the After Hours series so far this season. And hopefully all the tactics that we talked about get put into action, and we have some big buck stories for you upcoming. So best of luck out there. We hope you have an incredible season, and thank you so much for the support.